Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the Grapplers Academy. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the importance of studying and how to study, particularly for those guys starting on the journey, maybe within the first 6 to 12 months of Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, like studying is a very important part of your development, and as Bonn says, those who progress faster are going to be the ones that go home and think about the sport and the training after they get home. And we list off a list of various sources and also athletes that we look to, as well as giving you advice on where you can go to study further. I think studying the game or the sport in itself kind of gives you really good insight outside of your own academy and club that you train at. It's very easy to sort of get swept up in sort of the same group of techniques that you use with your training partners and get used on uni training partners. And you almost forget there's other stuff out there until you sort of watch a match and be like, that's how that works, or I've never seen that technique before. I want to study that more. So I think, I don't know about yourself, but studying for me, the more I've done it more recently, like since we've started working on this, I've seen more of the importance of it and started to appreciate the studying more than maybe I used to, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, like when I was starting off in Jiu-Jitsu and the difference between studying, like more that I have done when I've been a coach or when we've been doing this podcast, and the way that I've looked at matches differently and techniques differently from that point versus what I used to do early on, white and blue belt. It'd be probably more just a case of watching matches for enjoyment and kind of maybe not even thinking it was necessarily studying, and probably missing a lot of good opportunities to pick up on good techniques, or even just like what everybody else does and just watching Instagram and then trying to come in and do some stupid stuff that you've seen on Instagram that you've got no concept of how it works, how to apply it. It's not part of your gym system. You know, you've got part of an MMA gym and you're coming in trying to do some 10th planet stuff, and you've not got the knee flexibility for it, and it's just a big problem. So yeah, you're right. I think like when there's going to be a lot of people out there falling into the same trap as well. And it's kind of like that beginning spark, isn't it, where you're looking at something new and you're like, I want to incorporate that into our game, that looks good, or I think that'll suit me, or that looks exciting, and you just want to kind of add it in. But I think the way that my coach Matt kind of said it to me at the beginning, which is always kind of stuck, is the people who are going to progress the quickest are the ones that are going away thinking about it in between the training sessions, and that actually means going away studying and coming back with fresh ideas, and not just like, I turned up on Monday, I'm going to go away and not think about it and come back in on Wednesday and then maybe I can't even remember what I was doing. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but there's a couple of lads that I used to train with as well who used to physically write notes in the book and take notes of the session. Now, personally for me, I've never used that as a strategy, just because I don't think early on the notes that I would have made would have been concise enough to kind of make sense. But also, having been a PT and in the fitness industry for all that time that I've been training as well, kind of the two coincided. My ability to kind of study for the jiu-jitsu, I always kind of borrowed from the way that I studied and analysed stuff from a PT point of view.
Oh, definitely. I sort of am the same with that. Like, even going through school, like making notes, I'd never look back on my notes, but I'd find that if I was able to make notes in my own terms and sort of my own wording, the information would sort of sink in a little bit easier. So if I do make notes, I'm never going to look back on them. But it sort of helps me sort of retain that information a little bit easier. And sort of going back to what you said before as well about like watching matches for enjoyment. I've never been like a sports watcher. Like, watched it a little bit with my dad growing up. I watched the UFC for enjoyment, but up until I started to actually study grappling matches, I never got the enjoyment out of watching grappling matches. Like, I watched the big highlight ones and the big name ones, but up until like to the point where I was studying it and started to keep an eye out for those intricate details and sort of look for those things in the matches. I never actually got as much enjoyment watching the matches as I do now that I've started to watch it from a different perspective, and now I can watch it for enjoyment as well as watch it for studying. And like what you said as well about the Instagram thing makes me laugh, because watching Instagram videos, you can't slow it down, you can't rewind it, you can't pause it unless they got an IGTV now. But there's no way to sort of break down something that you've seen on Instagram without having to try and find a way to download the video, watch it on like a slower software where you can slow it down, rewind it. And you're almost kind of guessing when you're watching the Instagram videos and coming in and trying it. And then there's always a thing of, saw this really cool thing on Instagram, can I show you it? It's like, yeah. And then there's no video. It's they're trying to remember what they've seen. And it's like, it's always impossible to refind it as well. But I remember when I first started studying, and it was sort of like early YouTube days when the tutorials were very hard to come by. VHS was still a thing. Not as much a thing, but
how old are you?
It's about 10 years ago. It's like VHS only really started to go out. Like, I'm feeling my age now.
Yeah.
Because I do remember getting a UFC video, and then I got hold of the DVD afterwards, and it was all books, the tutorials. And I remember going into Waterstones, finding an Eddie Bravo lockdown book, and I was like, Eddie Bravo, I recognise that name. Oh, half guard, brilliant. And what was good about that one is that they said in the beginning of the book was like, do not progress to the next technique or next position until you've got a good understanding of the technique that you've been reading. And I was in my head, I was like, right, great. I'll read the position, read through all the techniques in that one position, then I'll work through them systematically. And I've got to say, some of the techniques that I was using I've adapted them a little bit more, but I still use a base of them like to this day. But yeah, like after that, the studying kind of was not as organised after that book, because me being an absolute wally, I lost the book after a couple of weeks. But yeah, it's sort of, since talking about it, I'm sort of reflecting back on where I started studying the sport and studying for progression rather than just sort of watching it, to what I do, what we do now, and what I do in my own time now as well. It's like night and day, the difference in the studying. And I think like we both have similar ways to do it, but then I think we both have different takes, and we both have a different eye as well. So like when we were like doing the first few videos where we were breaking down matches, there were details that you were pointing out that I wasn't seeing initially. And I was like, and then I'd go back after we've finished recording, and I'd rewatch it for that detail to get those extra details in there. And I think studying with people is helpful as well. Like I know we're sort of trying to go into the basics of studying today, but yeah, sort of as we've sort of started to unravel it, there's loads more coming out.
Oh, totally. Like I definitely agree with you in terms of like studying with somebody else and having more than one eye on it, or more than one train of thought on it is has been massive for me, because all the stuff that I've done before has been a lot of studying by myself, and you know, you kind of might just not pick up on something on the first watch particularly, or even maybe you watch it on the first go, and then you kind of fixated about the one thing that you saw was the thing that should be taken away from the video. But actually, there might be a couple of other details there that, because you've kind of gone off on that one train of thought initially, you kind of disregarding the other little bits and pieces. But actually, there's some really good value to take from that. So watching and studying with a partner is good, and just bouncing those ideas back and forward is massive. That's helped me a lot, even just over this time period of the past couple of months that we've been doing it. I think, like you say, it is a massive topic that you could talk about, because studying for a white into blue belt is going to be completely different from studying for a coach, and being able to study in those higher belts as well. Because actually, to fully absorb the information well enough to do it is one thing, and then actually you practicing your repetitions is what's going to get you proficient at the technique if you're doing it well, but then be able to relay that information and understand how to assimilate the information and then give it out to somebody else that's going to be in a useful format for them to learn it as well is massive. I think for me, like I said just before, and I don't know whether you could say to the same as well, but being a coach, being a PT coach as well for as many years as I've been doing it, I'm basically like used to watching the way that people move and seeing human mechanics, whether and in the simplest form of a barbell, like watching barbell paths and being able to look at what's going on, like foot position here, hip position there. And that has probably been the biggest frame of reference that I've taken over the years, from being able to take my eye from analysing people in the gym and apply that to either watching videos, or I even class studying as watching my training partners roll or watching other matches. And I'm like, his hips were here and that's why it worked, or this and that, that sort of thing. So I'm really lucky, and I know you're the same as well, of having that experience. So I guess one really good thing that we should probably talk about or even think about is like, what advice could we give from what we've done from like a PT point of view, and how we look at it in terms of just like body mechanics, and what are the key things to be looking at for people to try and develop that sort of eye for themselves. I think for me, like it's the key points of control and the big movers of the body. And we've talked about it before on all the videos we've kind of broken down. It's like hip position, head position, and then fighting on the levers, which is basically hands and the feet, isn't it? So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
I think to sort of get practice on getting that sort of more attentive eye, I think it's important that the repetition and just watching how people move is very important to that. Because in essence, jiu-jitsu is a very difficult sport to study. There's so much going on that is invisible to the eye, and you won't necessarily see it unless you're aware of it. So, for example, like the Josh Barnett match we studied at the start of the podcast, the way that he angles his hips and has his feet into the ground to drive more pressure through one hip than the other. Now, to someone who's not aware, that just might be normal to them. They won't see the difference and the subtleties in the angle of the movement. Whereas yourself and I, we've experienced it, we play that way, but also we're looking for those minute details because we're used to seeing those minute details with the people that we work with. So if someone's doing a deadlift and their hips are out of line, or they're leaning too far forward, or they're not over their center of gravity, we need to be aware of those subtleties to make the right adjustments. And I think it's important for people just to study movement as a prerequisite before trying to dive too deeply into like really intense jiu-jitsu studying. And that could just be a case of, okay, I'm going to watch a technique video and I'm going to watch every single limb and see how it moves individually, and then start again, and then watch it back, and then start again, then watch it back again, and try and be aware of those minor changes. Because like, now that we've sort of speaking about it, like we essentially get hundreds of reps of movement analysis daily. And you may even do it yourself when, like I know I do, when I'm sort of sat there, people watching or if I'm waiting, I'll analyze how people walk, how they carry their posture, how they carry things, if they're picking something off the floor. It's sort of hard to switch off from that sometimes. And then strangely enough, when I'm training myself in a gym, I've just got tunnel vision because there's sort of red flags everywhere. So I'm just sort of like, right, I'm switching off the sensors for now. So I think we're fortunate enough that we do get that practice.
Yep.
But I think the starting place for people would be to either watch instructionals and try to be hyper aware of every single movement, and then watching a match, but with the same athlete who's done this instructional, and then seeing how they move. So just watching the one athlete and watching how they move. And then if you see something you like, make a note of it, get to the end of the match, and then come back to it. And it's just like drilling, just like rolling. It's all about repetition for the study and analysis. Is there anything that you'd think to add to that, or anything?
I totally agree with what you're saying, but I'm going to suggest something and maybe a step even before that.
Yeah.
And like the really common mistake that a lot of white belts or people who've been doing it for less than 6 months or maybe even within that first year, and we've talked about it before as well. And before you can kind of analyse something, and you said have that frame of reference on touch sensitivity and body position, I think you've got to be able to know your own body position first and actually figure out what pressure and movement feels like to you, and like how actually unbalancing your limbs feels, how it feels to get your balance taken. And I think a massive part of that is being able to relax at first.
Yeah.
I kind of talk about it as the difference between first person and then going third person on a computer game. If you're in the middle of a roll and you're in first person, like you just said, you've got tunnel vision. So you don't know what's going on with your limbs and you don't know where you are in space. It's a very fixated view. But if you could pull that camera angle back and go third person, you'll be able to see everything that's going on. You can see your limbs. You've got a much broader picture. And you can start to break that down a little bit more. And the biggest thing that most people mess up when they're in those first couple of months is like panicking and not breathing and just being and fixed in the moment. And so many times I've just said to people, relax, breathe, think about what you're doing. Just like take a minute. Like, you know, it's not a fight. Just think about what you're doing. Try and get out of your head a little bit and picture what's going on in the big picture. So I completely agree with what you were saying before about analysing and finding a technique and then a match and then trying to break it down bit by bit by bit. But I think the first bit that you've got to do is understand how your own body moves in space.
Yeah.
Because even jiu-jitsu is so much more advanced than gym exercise. Whatever you're doing in the gym, the thing that you're working with doesn't move. It's not trying to move back.
No.
The only thing that's happening in the gym with the equipment is gravity. If you let go of the weight, it's going to the floor 100% of the time. That's exactly what it's going to do. You can predict that every time. So the only factor that you've got to factor in is gravity. Whereas when you're doing it with a person, their 360 degrees worth of movement on your 360 degrees worth of movement. So figure out your own body positioning first and then do all the things that you just talked about.
Yeah. And then sort of like once they've got that sort of basis, is there anything that you sort of recommend sort of once they've got a basic understanding of how the body moves, they've got a relatively good point of reference due to like for their experience on how they play and sort of they're sort of dipping their toe in the studying game.
Yeah.
Is there an angle that you'd sort of suggest someone to go, or anything that you'd suggest people to start with, or?
Yeah, 100%. And it's kind of just like you were saying there, I'll build on top of that. It's having that initial understanding and maybe having a reservoir or well of techniques that they already know pretty well. And then using that as your base point and then just slowly edging out off the back of it. So let's say you've got really good triangles, like you've done a good job of learning triangles in that first 12 months of studying. Try and find stuff that like matches that in terms of pressure and feeling and sensitivity, but is a little bit different. So maybe start looking at how you can add an arm bar into that and start making the arm bar the next bit of the technique, because you're going to be so familiar with all the setup requirements that are needed for a triangle that just changing one variable is going to be a lot easier to do, and adding that arm bar or the next step, kind of like we talked about when we talked about developing systems or katas. This is really applicable to this as well. So like, go back and watch those videos if you've not seen them, but use what you're really familiar with and then add on to that, because you're going to find it really difficult. Like, let's say if you've got a closed guard style of play and you know you're good at triangles, or maybe even like you've adopted that 10th planet style go-go platters and all this sort of stuff, you're going to find it really difficult to go and use that same pressure and learn how to do Josh Barnett style top heavy pressure, like wrestler's pressure. There's almost no frame of reference between the two. So actually going from there to there, even though having a broad spectrum of both sides of the game is massively important and is where you want to get to in the long term, being able to connect the dots there's too much space in between. So you need to, in my mind, kind of make the circle through the techniques to get from one to the other. But mostly based off just continuing with a little bit of experience that you've got and building on it.
Yeah, I think to add to that as well, especially in those first 2 to 3 years, I'd try and find an athlete as well to sort of not focus all of your study around, but someone who plays similar to how you either want to play or do play, or is really good at the techniques that you want to do, but have them in your weight category. So go back to the triangle example. Like say for myself, I would go to, all right, I want to improve my triangles. Being a heavyweight, it's not the most commonly used submission in my weight division as opposed to other ones. But, well, I can't say that, but it's probably going to get spammed out by comments going, actually, 2009, this submission was used. Right, yeah. But, so if you type in the submission that you want to work on, and then there's a great website, BJJ Heroes. So if you were to put triangle BJJ Heroes, it'll take you to their page, and essentially they have a list of athletes who's actually renowned for using that technique. Go through that list, find the one that's closest to your style, and then watch them for a while. Watch them in matches, find what the matches where they've finished their opponents with this technique, and essentially study their journey from the start of the sequence to the closing sequence and how they've managed to get there. Like I do this with a number of techniques now that I do, where I know that my shoulder crunch sweep, like Gordon Ryan does it better than anybody else. So I'm going to study him doing that sweep. I love the way that Rustam Chiziev wrestles, so I'm going to study his stand-up. Like if I got to the point where I was playing more close guard, which I'm starting to play, like I would start to go that way soon. Janji Hibero, for me, one of the best close guards. Butterfly guard. I know he's not in my weight division, but Marcelo Garcia. Having a number of athletes who, or just the one athlete to start off with, who you want to try and emulate and take bits away from their style that you can plant into yours, is also just as important.
Yeah, definitely. I think now you saying that, and when you probably compare it to like when you were a kid, or whatever sports you were into when you were younger, whether it was like boxing or football, probably everybody can have a story when they were growing up, like, oh, I want to play like David Beckham. Like that was the big one, wasn't it? Like everybody wanted to do that David Beckham free kick.
Yeah.
And you can guarantee people were watching videos or just like watching highlights, or every time Beckham was taking a kick, they were trying to replicate that. Probably the same for Ronaldo now. Like people are going to gravitate towards an athlete naturally, and whether or not they're thinking about it, they're trying to emulate the things that they do well, and then trying to assimilate into that their own game. So yeah, it's exactly the same for jiu-jitsu. And then, like you said, building that repertoire of like an omni athlete where you basically got whole bases covered is where you want to get to eventually, and then you start to innovate your own stuff if you get to that point, which is kind of like the ultimate position to be in, isn't it? It's tough. There's a lot of information out there as well to take, and there's a lot of free stuff on YouTube. You can pay for a lot of instructionals as well, but just keep it basic to start off with. Don't try and learn everything at once, because you're not going to learn anything.
No. I think if someone's in a position as well where they can get purchase a tutorial, I'd advise sort of sticking to one athlete or one sort of thing to start off with. So maybe find someone who you really enjoy watching their matches, and then buy into their system. So I think Craig Jones has got a really good back attack series. Tom the Blast has got a great half guard series. Lachlan Giles has got a great leg lock series, and body lock passing. There's, like I said, there's loads out there on what to do. And yeah, if you're starting off with your journey for studying, like I'd really advise sort of sticking to the one athlete to start off with. And then also make sure that you're watching their matches as well as the tutorials, because it's great, all fine and dandy, seeing how someone tells you how to do a technique, but seeing them do that in a match really, really gives you a better perspective on what's happening. Like I remember just come to my mind then, like there's a time when I was trying to learn an alternative guard pass, and for me, Leandro Lowe was one of the best. Well, I think he still is one of the best guard passers in the gi, and I ended up studying his grips on his Toriander pass, because I already knew the Toriander pass, and there was just details that I was missing. Watching him play it in various matches and studying where he gets his grips, and just literally playing over the same 30-second loop over and over and over and over. It gave me the confidence then to be like, okay, this is the grip here, move my arms this way, here's this small detail that I was missing. Took it to training the next week, and my percentage of passes went right up, even on more experienced players, just from the small details that I picked up from watching matches.
Nice. I think the only one thing that I'd kind of add into this as a last bit for me as well is like the actual technique and execution and the physical things that are going on from watching an instructional or finding a video or an athlete that you want to pick with is good, and it's one thing, but actually a really good thing from having coaching or even a really good instructional. I think like Lachlan does this well. Keenan's actually really good at verbalizing what I'm about to say, and Gordon Ryan's really good at it as well. It's like the why. So it's like, why and when are you going to apply this, and what situation is it useful?
Yeah.
As opposed to just like knowing the technique, because knowing the technique's great, and it's great for using it in that one situation that you saw in the instructional video or in the match. But then it's also figuring out like the mindset, and this is where it's good to build on what you said about picking an athlete. You can get into the mindset and start to understand the why and the when, which is equally as important as how actually to execute the technique. And then you can start to incorporate that into your system as well, or your style. So it's like, all right, okay, so I'm here a lot, and actually that'd be useful here, so I can start implementing it. And that's when your percentages will go way up on submissions or sweeps or passes.
Oh, definitely. And like I said, I completely agree with that. And you'll also find that when you do go down that rabbit hole, other athletes that are maybe not as mainstream, but on the fringe, who are just as good as what you're trying to study, will start to appear. And yeah, just as Bonn said, that why is the critical part of learning a new technique, because there's no point trying to sweep someone if their balance is perfect. You want to get their balance off to then get the sweep. So getting that why and the when really leads up to an easier how, and then from there you sort of, your understanding of everything within that position and that technique will massively increase as well. And like I said, like I forgot to mention Keenan before, but Keenan's great at it. Even Hinger, Galval I've seen as well. The list goes on, doesn't it?
There's loads of world-class coaches, isn't there? And the instructionals and the videos are getting better. And actually, that's all down to practice, isn't it? They're getting better at just describing their craft and getting better at it over the years. And again, one more thing that I will add is that is the value in coaching. You can watch as many YouTube videos as you like, but the best thing that you can do is try and find a really good coach, because you can get that direct feedback then for examples of the techniques that you're learning that are applicable to your experience, because everybody's leverage is different, everybody's pressure is different, and your coach will be able to show you or give you an example of how you can improve it specific to you. I don't think you can beat a good coach or live instruction. I've always been a firm believer of that, and I've always been really lucky to have good coaching over the years, so I really appreciate the value of it. But yeah, if you've not got a good coach, or you can't find a good coach, and you want to kind of supplement and add into that, then videos and instructionals are perfect.
100%. And just one last thing to build up on the thing about the coach. Don't be shy to take techniques to your coach that you're interested in. If you've studied something and you want to understand it further, take it to your coach, because if they've heard of it or not, they will be able to see details again that you might not necessarily see. And practicing it on someone, or practicing it with someone who's more experienced or knows how to deliver information, as well as the tutorial you've got, will give you a lot more understanding on the technique that you're trying to study. Thank you for watching another episode of the Grapplers Academy, guys. If you like what you see, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.
Go ahead and check out some of the older videos in the series where we talk about strategy and starting to develop your own game plan. That's going to enhance what we talked about today in terms of studying and start to accelerate your learning. And keep your eye out for upcoming videos as well, because we've got some good in-depth interviews coming up, which is also going to help you expand your knowledge.